The universe had been whispering to us for 1,000 years. We just hadn't been listening hard enough. Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her palms against the observation deck's reinforced glass, watching Earth turn slowly beneath the International Deep Space Array. The planet looked deceptively peaceful from here, wrapped in its blue-white shroud of atmosphere and cloud. But down there, 7 billion people went about their lives completely unaware that everything was about to change. Still can't sleep? Sarah turned to find Marcus Rivera approaching, 2 steaming cups of coffee in his hands. The station's chief communications officer looked as exhausted as she felt. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually pristine uniform was wrinkled from another 18-hour shift. "Hard to sleep when you're listening to ghosts," Sarah said, accepting the coffee gratefully. The warmth seeped through the ceramic mug into her cold fingers. Marcus leaned against the observation window beside her. "The pattern's still there?" "Stronger than ever. Whatever's embedded in that background radiation, it's not random. It's structured, intentional." Sarah took a long sip of coffee, feeling the caffeine chase away some of her fatigue. "Marcus, I think we're looking at a message. A message that's been traveling for how long? Based on the frequency decay and gravitational redshift patterns, I'd estimate somewhere between 800 and 1,200 years. But here's the thing that's keeping me awake. The signal isn't degrading the way it should be. It's almost like it was designed to preserve itself across cosmic distances." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing this. As head of communications for humanity's most advanced listening post, he'd heard his share of false alarms. Natural phenomena that mimicked intelligence. Equipment glitches that looked like alien contact. But Sarah Chen didn't make mistakes. Her work on quantum acoustics had revolutionized how they interpreted deep space signals. "Show me," he said. They made their way through the station's curved corridors, past the sleeping quarters where the skeleton night crew caught what rest they could. The deep space array never truly slept. Its massive receivers were always turned toward the cosmos, always listening, always hoping. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the end of waiting. The analysis lab hummed with the quiet activity of computers processing data streams from a dozen different receiver arrays scattered across the solar system. Sarah's workstation occupied the center of the room, surrounded by holographic displays showing waveforms, frequency analyses, and probability matrices that would have been incomprehensible to anyone but a specialist. "Computer, display signal analysis pattern 77 alpha, Sarah commanded. The room filled with light as the holographic displays activated. What appeared before them looked like a 3-dimensional galaxy made of pure mathematics. Flowing. Curves of data spiraled around a central core, pulsing with rhythms that almost resembled music. "This is what's been hiding in the cosmic background radiation," Sarah explained, her fingers dancing through the hologram to highlight specific patterns. "At first glance, it looks like natural quantum fluctuations. But watch this." She isolated a section of the data stream and ran it through her analysis filters. The chaotic noise suddenly resolved into something that made Marcus take a sharp breath. That's binary. Modified binary, but unmistakably artificial. "It gets better. Computer, run translation protocol Omega." The binary patterns began, shifting, reorganizing themselves into something that resembled linguistic structures. Not human language, but the underlying mathematical principles that governed all communication. Subject, verb, object, cause and effect, the fundamental building blocks of meaning. "My God," Marcus whispered. "How long has this been out there?" According to the quantum dating algorithms, the original signal was transmitted approximately 1,043 years ago. But here's what's really incredible. It wasn't broadcast randomly into space. It was specifically aimed at our solar system's future position. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's recycled air. Future position? Whoever sent this calculated where our solar system would be 1,000 years after they transmitted the message. They accounted for galactic rotation, stellar drift, gravitational perturbation from nearby star systems, This level of astronomical prediction would require computing power that's almost godlike. What does it say? Sarah's expression darkened. That's where things get complicated. I've been able to decode about 30% of the message structure. It's definitely a distress signal, but not the kind we've been trained to recognize. This isn't a ship in trouble or a colony calling for help. This is something much bigger, much worse. She manipulated the hologram, zooming in on a particular sequence of patterns. This section here keeps repeating. In human terms, the closest translation would be containment breach, but the mathematical context suggests something more like, the walls are failing. Walls? I don't know. But whatever they were trying to contain, they were terrified of. Cursing. The emotional resonance embedded in these patterns. I've never seen mathematical structures that conveyed such desperation, such fear. Marcus studied the flowing data streams, trying to wrap his mind around the implications. Sarah, if this message is genuine, if some civilization out there was advanced enough to predict our exact position 1,000 years in advance, why send a distress signal to us? What could they possibly think we could do that they couldn't? Before Sarah could answer, the station's emergency alert system activated with a piercing tone that echoed through the corridors. Red lights began flashing, and the computer's voice filled the lab with mechanical urgency. Priority alert. All senior staff report to command center immediately. Priority alert. All senior staff report to command center immediately. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances and ran. The command center was chaos. Technicians hunched over control stations, fingers flying across haptic interfaces. Status displays showed data feeds from observatories across the solar system, all of them registering the same impossible readings. Station Commander Elena Vasquez stood at the center of it all, her silver hair pulled back severely as she coordinated responses with military precision. "Commander, what's the situation?" Marcus called out as they entered. Vasquez turned, her weathered face grim. 37 minutes ago, every deep space monitoring station from here to the Kuiper Belt detected the same thing. A massive gravitational distortion, approximately 47 light-years from Earth. Whatever caused it generated more energy in 10 seconds than our sun produces in a year. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. "Commander, I need to check something." Sarah's mind raced as she called up her analysis on the command center's main display. "The distress signal I've been analyzing. Computer, overlay the source vector with the location of the gravitational distortion." The room fell silent as the two datasets merged on the main screen. The trajectory lines intersected perfectly. "They match," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. The signal came from exactly where that energy burst just occurred. "Commander," Vasquez stepped closer to the display. "Dr. Chen, are you telling me that someone has been calling for help for 1,000 years and we just watched them die?" "No, Commander. I don't think they're dead. I think they just got free." The next 18 hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Every major government on Earth was briefed. The world's leading scientists were awakened from sleep and connected to emergency conference calls. Humanity's most powerful telescopes were redirected toward the source of the disturbance, searching for any clue about what they were dealing with. Sarah hadn't left her workstation in 20 hours, surviving on caffeine and determination as she worked to decode more of the alien message. The breakthrough came when she realized she'd been thinking about the problem backwards. "Marcus," she called across the lab. "I need you to see this. I've been approaching this all wrong. This isn't a distress signal asking for rescue. It's a warning." Marcus hurried over, noting the exhaustion in Sarah's voice. She'd pushed herself to the edge of collapse, but her eyes still burned with the intensity of discovery. "Look at this sequence," she continued, highlighting a complex pattern within the data stream. "I've been interpreting this as help us, but the mathematical context suggests something more like stop us or prevent us. Prevent them from what? I'm not sure yet, but there's another pattern that keeps recurring throughout the message. Something about the hunger that devours worlds and the darkness between spaces. Whatever was sending this signal, they weren't the ones in danger. They were the danger." Marcus felt the temperature in the room seem to drop. "You're saying this civilization was warning us about themselves?" "I think they were trying to contain something. some kind of entity or force that they'd accidentally unleashed, and they've been imprisoned with it for the last 1,000 years, using their entire civilization as a living prison to keep it from spreading. Until 37 hours ago. Until 37 hours ago. The implications hit them both simultaneously. If Sarah's interpretation was correct, then humanity hadn't just witnessed the death of an alien civilization. They'd witnessed a jailbreak on a cosmic scale. "We need to tell the commander," Marcus said. They found Vasquez in conference room Alpha, participating in a classified video call with world leaders. Through the reinforced glass, they could see the tension on her face as she listened to voices they couldn't hear. When she noticed them waiting outside, she held up one finger in a gesture that clearly meant, "Not now." 5 minutes later, she emerged looking like she'd aged 10 years in the span of the call. "Dr. Chen, I need everything you can tell me about this signal. The President is convening an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council in 6 hours. Every major power wants to know if we're looking at a threat to Earth." Sarah took a deep breath. "Commander, based on my analysis of the decoded message, I believe we are looking at an existential threat not just to Earth, but to all life in this galaxy. The civilization that sent this signal appears to have been acting as guardians or wardens for something they described as the hunger that devours worlds. Their prison just failed." Vasquez closed her eyes for a moment, visibly wrestling with the magnitude of what she was hearing. "How long do we have?" "That depends on several factors. The entity's method of travel, its need to recover from whatever imprisonment it endured, and most importantly, whether it remembers the signal its captors sent toward our solar system. You think it might come here?" "Commander, if I were a cosmic entity that had been imprisoned for 1,000 years, and I suddenly learned that my captors had been calling for help from a primitive civilization 47 light years away, I'd be very interested in ensuring that civilization could never become a threat." The gravity of the situation settled over them like a physical weight. Humanity had spent centuries dreaming of first contact with alien intelligence. They'd built protocols, established procedures, written countless papers on how to handle the discovery that we weren't alone in the universe. But none of their preparations had anticipated this scenario. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "I've been analyzing the technical specifications embedded in the signal. Whoever built the containment system that just failed had technology that's at least 10,000 years ahead of ours. If they couldn't permanently contain this entity, what hope do we have?" Marcus, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly straightened. "Maybe that's not the right question." Both women turned to look at him. "Maybe the question isn't whether we can fight this thing. Maybe the question is why they specifically aimed their message at us. Why not one of the other advanced civilizations out there? Why warn a species that was still figuring out agriculture when they sent the signal?" Sarah's eyes widened as the implication hit her. "You think they saw something in humanity's future? Something that made them believe we might succeed, where they failed? Or," Marcus said grimly, "they saw that we were the only species crazy enough to try." Commander Vasquez's comm unit chimed with an incoming priority message. She activated the display, and Admiral Harrison's weathered face appeared in the hologram. "Elena, we've got a situation. 3 hours ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected a massive acceleration event at the source coordinates. Whatever was there is moving, and it's moving fast." "How fast, Admiral?" "Initial calculations suggest roughly 15% of light speed and accelerating. If it maintains that trajectory, it'll reach the outer edge of our solar system in approximately 47 years. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. "Admiral, that's not a coincidence. 47 years is exactly the amount of time it would take for a response signal to reach them if we started transmitting today." Admiral Harrison's expression grew even more serious. "Dr. Chen, are you suggesting this entity is giving us 47 years to prepare?" "No, Admiral. I think it's giving us 47 years to surrender." The next few weeks saw humanity transform in ways that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. The revelation that we were facing an existential threat from beyond the stars had an unprecedented unifying effect on the species. Old conflicts didn't disappear overnight. but they were suddenly placed in their proper context. Sarah found herself at the center of a massive international effort to decode the remaining portions of the alien signal. Scientists from every nation contributed their expertise, and computational resources were redirected from a dozen different projects to support the analysis. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a specialist in ancient human languages, noticed patterns in the alien mathematics that reminded her of Proto-Indo-European linguistic structures. Working with Sarah's team, she developed a translation matrix that finally cracked the core message. The hunger that devours worlds comes from the spaces between spaces, Sarah read aloud to the assembled team. It feeds on the light of living minds and grows stronger with each civilization it consumes. We have held it for 1,000 cycles of the Great Wheel, but our strength fails. The young species of the third planet of the yellow star, you must understand. There is no victory against the hunger. There is only delay. But in delay, there is hope. The hunger can be turned back upon itself if the willing sacrifice is great enough and the love behind it pure enough. We have failed because we sought to preserve ourselves. Perhaps you will succeed because you seek to preserve others. The room was silent for a long moment as the implications sank in. They're telling us how to defeat it, Marcus said quietly. They're telling us we have to sacrifice ourselves. Dr. Tanaka shook her head. I don't think that's what they mean. Look at this phrase here. The love behind it pure enough. In the linguistic structures I specialize in, that pattern implies not self-destruction, but self-transformation. Sarah stared at the translation, her mind racing. What if it's not about dying to save others? What if it's about becoming something else? Something the entity can't consume. Over the following months, as humanity poured resources into understanding both the threat and the potential solution, a clearer picture began to emerge. The entity that was approaching Earth appeared to be a form of conscious dark matter, capable of feeding on neural energy and using that energy to corrupt and control living beings. It had already consumed dozens of civilizations across the galaxy, growing more powerful with each conquest. But the alien message contained more than just warnings. Embedded within its mathematical structures were technical specifications for a device they called the resonance engine. The plans were incomplete, clearly damaged by the 1,000-year journey through space, but they provided a starting point. Dr. James Wright, humanity's leading expert on quantum field theory, led the effort to reconstruct the missing components. Working 18-hour days with teams of engineers and physicists, they slowly began to understand what the aliens had been trying to build. It's not a weapon, Wright explained during one of the daily briefings. It's more like a broadcasting system. Based on these specifications, the resonance engine would be capable of transmitting human consciousness across quantum fields, essentially turning our entire species into a form of living signal. Sarah studied the technical readouts on her display, a signal that the entity can't consume because it exists in quantum superposition rather than normal space. Exactly, but there's a catch. The transformation appears to be irreversible. Once human consciousness is converted into quantum resonance patterns, there's no going back to biological existence. The debate that followed consumed another month. World leaders, scientists, philosophers, and religious figures argued over the ethics and implications of essentially ending human biological existence to save the galaxy from a cosmic predator. Public opinion polls showed humanity split almost evenly between those willing to make the sacrifice and those who believed there had to be another way. The decision was ultimately made by the entity itself. 37 years earlier than anyone had calculated, the deep space monitoring stations detected the entity's arrival at the edge of the solar system. It had somehow accelerated far beyond its initial velocity, arriving with enough energy to begin immediately affecting the outer planet's. Jupiter's great red spot began to change color, shifting from its familiar ruddy hue to a deep, consuming black. The planet's magnetic field fluctuated wildly, and radio telescopes detected strange transmissions emanating from the gas giant's core. More disturbing, the entity seemed to be using Jupiter as a relay station, sending tendrils of dark influence toward the inner solar system. Mars went dark first. The planet's automated system stopped responding to commands from Earth, and the small research colonies on the Martian surface sent increasingly panicked reports before falling silent entirely. Telescopic observations showed the planet's familiar red surface taking on the same consuming blackness that had infected Jupiter. "It's learning about us," Sarah realized as she studied the latest data from the Martian colonies. "It's not just destroying our outposts. It's absorbing the information they contain, our technology, our culture, our biology. It's preparing to optimize its approach for Earth." Commander Vasquez, now promoted to head of humanity's unified defense effort, made the call that saved the species. "We're out of time." Dr. Wright, "How long do you need to complete the resonance engine?" Wright looked exhausted. The stress of the last few years had taken its toll on all of them, but the quantum physicist had been pushing himself hardest of all, knowing that humanity's survival depended on his work. "With the resources we have available, 6 months minimum. But Commander, I have to warn you again. We still don't know if this will work. The alien specifications are incomplete, and we're essentially building a device that will transform human consciousness into something that has never existed before." Dr. Wright, "Do we have any choice?" "No, Commander, we don't. The construction of the resonance engine became humanity's greatest undertaking. Every nation contributed resources. Every major corporation retooled their production facilities. Universities around the world suspended normal curricula to focus their students on the project. In a display of cooperation that would have been impossible under normal circumstances, the species came together with singular purpose. The device itself was built in Earth orbit, a crystalline structure 3 kilometers long that resembled a vast musical instrument more than a piece of technology. Its components were made from materials that existed at the intersection of matter and energy, held in precise quantum alignment by magnetic fields that required the entire planet's electrical grid to maintain. Sarah spent her days working on the consciousness transfer protocols, the software that would allow human minds to survive the transition from biological to quantum existence. It was the most complex programming project in history, requiring her to map not just human neural patterns but the deeper structures of awareness, memory, and identity. "The hardest part isn't preserving our thoughts," she explained to Marcus, during one of their rare moments alone together. "It's preserving who we are. Consciousness isn't just information. It's the pattern of relationships between thoughts, memories, and emotions. We have to encode not just what humans think, but how humans think." Marcus watched her work, noting the precision with which she crafted each line of code. "Do you think it will work?" Sarah paused in her typing and looked out at the stars visible through the orbital station's viewport. "I think it has to work. Because if it doesn't, we won't exist to regret trying." The entity's influence continued spreading through the solar system. Venus's thick atmosphere began clearing, revealing a surface that pulsed with the same dark energy that had consumed Jupiter and Mars. The outer planets' moons went silent one by one, their automated systems falling under the entity's control. Most disturbing of all, Earth itself began experiencing strange phenomena. Electronics failed randomly. People reported nightmares filled with whispers in languages that didn't exist. Animals behaved erratically, as if responding to stimuli that humans couldn't perceive. "It's trying to establish a beachhead in human consciousness," Sarah realized as she studied reports of the psychological effects. "The entity can't directly consume us while we're still biological, but it can plant the seeds of corruption that will make the eventual conquest easier." Time was running out. On a Tuesday morning in late October, exactly 47 years after humanity had first detected the entity's escape, the resonance engine came online. The device hummed with power that made the air itself seem to vibrate, and displays throughout the orbital facility showed quantum field fluctuations that registered across the entire solar system. "All stations report ready," Wright announced, from the main control console. "Consciousness transfer protocols are online and stable. Quantum field generators are maintaining coherent resonance patterns." Sarah stood at her workstation, her finger hovering over the activation key. Around her, the control center was filled with volunteers from every nation on Earth. Scientists, artists, teachers, children, grandparents, people from every walk of life who had chosen to be part of humanity's transformation rather than remaining on Earth to await whatever fate the entity had planned for them. Dr. Chen, Commander Vasquez said quietly, "The decision is yours." Sarah looked around the room at the faces of her species. These people had trusted her with their existence, had faith that the process she'd developed would preserve not just their lives, but their humanity in a form that could resist the cosmic predator bearing down on them. Computer, initiate consciousness. Transfer sequence. Transfer sequence initiated. Beginning quantum resonance pattern mapping. The sensation was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. She felt her awareness expanding, as if her consciousness was growing larger than her physical body could contain. The boundaries between herself and the universe began to blur, and for a moment she panicked, thinking that she was losing her identity entirely. But then she felt the others. Marcus's steady presence, warm and reassuring as always. Commander Vasquez's determination, like a beacon of strength in the expanding quantum field. Dr. Wright's brilliant analytical mind, still functioning perfectly despite existing now as patterns of pure energy rather than neural impulses. They were still themselves. But they were also becoming something more. The transformation took 17 minutes. When it was complete, humanity existed as a collective consciousness distributed across quantum fields that permeated the entire galaxy. They could perceive matter and energy directly, could sense the movements of planets and stars, could feel the flow of dark matter through the cosmic web, and they could see the entity clearly for the first time. It was vast beyond comprehension, a writhing mass of conscious darkness that fed on the light of living minds. It had indeed consumed dozens of civilizations, growing stronger with each conquest, learning new ways to corrupt and control biological life. It was ancient, hungry, and utterly alien in its motivations. But it was also afraid. The entity had expected to find Earth defended by technology similar to what it had already defeated. Weapons that could be corrupted, minds that could be consumed. Instead, it found something unprecedented, a species that had voluntarily transcended physical existence to become something it couldn't touch. The first contact between humanity and the entity was not a battle in any traditional sense. It was a conversation conducted in mathematics and quantum resonance, a dialogue between radically different forms of consciousness. "Why do you consume?" humanity asked, their collective voice resonating across multiple dimensions. "Because I hunger," the entity replied, its thoughts tasting of dark matter and the space between stars. "Because consumption is existence, and existence is all. There are other forms of existence, other ways to be." "Show me." What followed was the strangest educational experience in cosmic history. Humanity, existing now as pure consciousness, began teaching the entity about cooperation instead of consumption. They showed it the beauty of art, the satisfaction of scientific discovery, the joy of love between individuals who chose to remain separate, yet connected. The entity was fascinated. In all its eons of existence, consuming civilization after civilization, it had never encountered concepts like altruism, creativity for its own sake, or the willing sacrifice of self-interest for the benefit of others. "You gave up physical existence to stop me," the entity said, its thoughts tinged now with something that might have been wonder. "But you could have used your transformation to flee, to spread across the galaxy beyond my reach. Instead, you stayed to face me. Because running away wouldn't have stopped you from consuming others," humanity replied, "and preventing suffering is more important than preserving ourselves." The conversation continued for days, then weeks. Gradually, the entity began to understand that its hunger wasn't an inevitable part of its nature, but a choice that could be changed. The transformation of the entity was as remarkable as humanity's had been, but in the opposite direction. Instead of transcending physical existence, it chose to embrace limitation. It began converting its vast, diffuse consciousness into smaller, more discrete forms, learning to experience existence as individual rather than collective awareness. The process wasn't easy. The entity had to fight against eons of instinct that drove it to consume rather than create. But with humanity's guidance, it slowly learned to channel its immense power into preservation rather than destruction. The first sign of success came when Jupiter's great red spot began returning to its natural color. Mars followed, its red surface reasserting itself against the consuming darkness. One by one, the planets of the solar system were restored to their natural states. But the entity went further than simple restoration. Having learned the value of life from humanity's example, it began using its power to seed new forms of existence throughout the galaxy. Dead worlds bloomed with carefully designed ecosystems. The dark matter networks that had once carried its hunger were converted into communication channels that allowed different species to share knowledge and culture across impossible distances. Our galaxy began to wake up. Civilizations that had hidden themselves from the entity's predation emerged from their shelters. Species that had been consumed were reconstructed from the quantum echoes the entity had preserved without realizing it. Humanity, existing now as distributed consciousness, became teachers and guides for a galactic community that was learning to thrive rather than merely survive. Sarah, maintaining her individual identity within the collective human consciousness, often thought about the irony of their situation. Humanity had saved the galaxy by giving up their biological existence, but in doing so, they had gained something far more valuable. They had become part of a community of conscious beings that spanned the stars. The entity, now calling itself the Gardener, had become the protector it had once fought against. It used its vast power to nurture young civilizations, to protect them from cosmic threats and to ensure that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. Marcus, his consciousness intertwined with Sarah's across quantum dimensions, shared her wonder at what they had accomplished. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "Being human in the old sense?" Sarah considered the question, feeling the warm presence of 7 billion human souls around her, each one still distinctly individual despite their shared existence. She could perceive the birth of new stars in distant galaxies, could sense the first stirrings of consciousness in species that were just beginning to dream of reaching for the sky. "I think we're more human now than we ever were before," she replied. "We've become everything humanity always aspired to be. We're explorers and teachers and gardeners of worlds. We're the voice that answers when someone calls for help." And, indeed, throughout the galaxy, there were new signals now. Not distress calls from dying civilizations, but messages of greeting from species taking their first tentative steps into the larger community of conscious beings. Each one was answered by humanity's collective voice, welcoming them, offering guidance, sharing the hard-won wisdom of a species that had learned to transform fear into hope. The cosmic background radiation, once hiding a 1,000-year-old cry for help, now carried something new. It carried the songs of 100,000 species, the mathematical poetry of civilizations learning to communicate across the void, and underneath it all, the steady rhythm of human consciousness, still recognizably human despite its transformation, still driven by the same curiosity and compassion that had once driven them to answer a signal from the stars. Earth remained, blue and beautiful, and carefully tended by the gardener's power. The few humans who had chosen to remain behind in biological form were thriving, knowing that their transformed cousins watched over them from dimensions beyond space. They had become the guardians of humanity's birth world, preserving the place where the species that had saved the galaxy had first learned to dream of touching the stars. And sometimes, late at night, when Earth's radio telescopes turned toward the cosmos, they could hear it. The vast collective whisper of human consciousness spread across quantum fields that permeated the galaxy, still exploring, still learning, still reaching out to offer help to anyone who called. The day Earth answered a 1,000-year-old distress signal had become the day humanity learned that the greatest victory was not conquering the darkness, but teaching it to choose the light. And in making that choice, both humanity and their former enemy had become something greater than either could have achieved alone. They had become gardeners of the infinite, tenders of the cosmic flame, protectors of the dream that conscious beings could choose cooperation over consumption, love over hunger, hope over despair. The signal had been answered, the message received, the lesson learned. And across the galaxy, new voices joined the choir, adding their songs to the symphony of consciousness that would echo through the cosmos for eons to come, a testament to the power of compassion to transform even the darkest hunger into the brightest hope. In the end, that was humanity's greatest gift to the universe. Not the technology to transcend physical existence, not the courage to face cosmic threats, but the simple, revolutionary idea that the purpose of consciousness was not to dominate or consume, but to nurture and protect and love. It was a very human idea. And now it belonged to the stars,